let me just tell you what the strengths of New York are as I see them. The strengths are that we're so diverse. I mean, we have people from every ethnic, racial, religious group in the world. And it doesn't mean that everybody loves one another. That would be ridiculous. But it means that we understand that we have to be tolerant of everyone else, and that we're no better than anyone else, and that everybody who has come through this wonderful city, with very few exceptions, has been the subject of discrimination. So you're not alone. Obviously, there are some who have suffered more than others, but almost everybody has suffered, and that's changed things. And it is a city where you can rise from the very bottom. When Mario Cuomo, governor of the state of New York, and I, Ed Koch, mayor of the city of New York, would reminisce before public audiences, he and I would always confirm, he would always say, imagine, my parents came from Italy, and here I am, Italian, born in the United States, and the privilege of being the governor of the Empire State. And then I would always chirp in with, and here am I. My parents, Jewish, from Poland, escaped poverty and discrimination, and their son rose to become the mayor of the imperial city of the world. And I mean, it's unique. And then we do so many things in terms of culture that I mean, we have Tibetan lamas out on Staten Island more than I think they have any place else other than in Tibet. You have 14th century Poland recreated in Williamsburg by some people who are Hasidic and like to live their lives that way. You have Chinatown. It's not just in the old Chinatown. It's now out in Queens, which is probably the most diverse borough in the city because all of the new immigrants seem to go there, and many from Asia. And that's the strength that we have. And then, you know, there aren't very many people who are willing to say what's on their mind. New Yorkers say what's on their mind. And I think that's a great character strength. It gets into trouble. But it also distinguishes you, and ultimately people like it. People want to hear the truth, even when the truth hurts, as opposed to what they see as a patent falsehood. So you put that all together, and that's New York. And I kind of summed it up many times before audiences when I was mayor. I said, you know, I am one of the less than 50% of the people who live in New York City currently who was born here. I was born in the Bronx. But you don't have to be born in New York City to be a New Yorker. You have to live here for 6 months. And if at the end of the 6 months you walk faster, you talk faster, you think faster, you're a New Yorker. Oh, our future is assured. There's not a city in the world that people know as they know New York. There's not a city in the world that people long to come to as they long to come to New York. There's not a city in the world where people know the various sections, of course, Broadway being at the apex. And so our future is assured. It'll take longer than any one of us wants to come back to where we were, but we're going to get there.
I miss the lights that replaced the towers, the two beams of light. You know, for a while there, I became utterly impractical, and I said, why can't we keep them forever, those lights? And unfortunately, we couldn't. But yeah, you'll miss them. But then the great beauty of living is newness, infinite newness. Every minute brings a new opportunity. Every minute brings new growth, new experiences. And there'll be sadness and nostalgia, etc. But there'll be much more new excitement, new thrills, new levels of civility. See, I'm one who believes that the world goes from the slime to the sublime. And you can take Darwin and all your philosophers and all your ontologists, and that's the direction. It starts in a big explosion, and there's fluid, and there's gases that became fluid, and then liquids, and then fish, and then vegetation, and then us, and then things that stand up and are supposed to be thinking but still behave like animals, 9/11. And gradually you develop more and more civility in fits and starts until you're perfect. And you're all civility, and you really do love one another, and you learn to live together. And the place is perfect. And we're working toward that. The pleroma, Teilhard calls it. That's what I believe. And look, is that made up? Of course it's made up. Can you get there intellectually? No, but you can't disprove it intellectually either. And I choose to believe it. And New York City very much embodies that for me. It just keeps coming. You know, it has problems, the street blows up, 9/11 occurs, and you're going to rebuild, and after a while the memory will be there, but there'll be something new there and different and functioning and electric. Yeah, the image of the towers will be there, but there'll be a new reality as well. There won't be just the memory. There will be the moment that we'll be living in, and it'll be beautiful.
I feel very strongly that we should not be looking to replace what we had, because I think the whole point of our lives and our arts and our world is that we move on and we do something different, sometimes better, always more interesting, hopefully more beautiful. And I think my whole life and career have been predicated on that we are capable through our technology and through our arts and through our ingenuity to do things that we have not done before, to get out of the box, to do something new and different. I think the whole history of civilization is coming up with something creatively new and wonderful. And in my heart and soul, that's what I'm wishing for. I want to see something that doesn't imitate what was there, that does something entirely different, that perhaps makes a new kind of skyline, a new kind of city on the ground. I think that has happened in the past, will always happen, and it should happen there. For myself, maybe it's because I dislike those buildings. Maybe it's because the tragedy was so horrendous. I don't want to see big buildings there. I saw a park in Paris that was so far ahead of anything we know about landscape design in this country that once again was something you could not visualize. It's the Parc Citroën. It's built on the site of the old Citroën factory. It's almost like an island in the Seine. The landscaping is uniquely beautiful, and it is for people. And there are pavilions, there are fountains. There are 2 pavilions that are like greenhouses. There's a series of pavilions that you climb up into. The fountains the children are constantly playing in. We have none like them. They're orchestrated by computer. It's like music, the way they play. And the marvelous unexpectedness of the way these jets come and go, and the children dancing around in them. And then these places to sit. I want to see something like that, because I think you could incorporate the right memorabilia. I think you'd be giving a place for closure to this generation and a place for future generations to come and to understand. I don't say the whole site, that's ridiculous. I'm a realist. I know that New York you've got to build. But I would like to see something like this far more than some routine, cliche conception of something tall. I think it's the political fallback. Politicians all say, oh yes, we've got to have something grand, we've got to have something soaring, we've got to have something that speaks to the spirit and to the hearts of people. It's extremely important. It's important symbolically because of what we're commemorating. It's important urbanistically because we have a chance to do something really remarkable, really to do something in that area that has never been done before. It's important in public terms because it's a public space. It's important in private terms because private people will use it. And that's why I think, how much do you use, a tall building? The people who go there. This would be for everybody.
And if someone asks me what are your ideas about a memorial site or what to do there, I will withdraw from the question in humility, a rare sentiment for me. But I am not an authority, but I have my thoughts about it. And my answer will be, of course, this should be, this site should present a place to remember the horrendous human tragedy that took place there. But as a rebel poet, as an artist whose task in life, whose longing is to create, I would talk about recreation. I say, at the same time, let's build again. And of course, I am among those who believe the Twin Towers should be built again. But by the end of my expose, I would say let's add a dash of imagination, maybe arrogance. Let's make them one floor higher, just to bother the people who have destroyed them. I feel that a disaster shall not be forgotten, but I feel that living is not dragging your feet through a ruin, be it a human ruin, be it the loss of a dear one. So I think that besides remembering and having a place to remember, we should rebuild. And we should rebuild with daring, with magnificence, with joy, with panache, with grandeur. We should rebuild. And I am convinced that New York is going to preserve a space to remember and rebuild. And if the towers are rebuilt, if the towers are rebuilt in somewhat of twin towers, I would, and I did finish the book with that invitation. I would propose to walk again, and this time it would not be the walk of a man being in love with the two towers in a very intimate relationship. It will be almost the walk of a spokesman, the walk of the people of New York, of America, of the world, who would like to see doom overcome, who would like to see rebellion against doom. And in that walk, I would actually have with me on the wire all the people who believe this is a victory, and all the memory of the people who lost their life. And it will be the most meaningful walk in my life if this walk happens. So certainly, I am ready to do in a few years when those towers are crowning again in the sky. I'm ready to walk again between them and again almost salute the impossible, because it seems right now impossible to rebuild those two towers.
The story of Pasquale Buzelli is long and complicated. Typically, it's full of confusion. He's a mid-ranking Port Authority engineer, like many others, a youngish fellow who worked at the Trade Center. At Port Authority, of course, owned those buildings and had offices in the buildings, many offices, and he worked in one of those offices. He was a particularly well-behaved fellow, as were the others who stayed with him, sticking to the approved plan of, wait for the evacuation order. So rather than leaving, as the great majority of people did, whether on their own initiative or on someone else's orders, these people stayed fairly high in the North Tower and then were caught by the collapse during a descent of the stairwells. Buzelli was approximately, I was on the 22nd floor, I believe, or in that neighborhood. He was fairly high up in the building. He heard the collapse coming from above. It sounded to him like a boulder coming down on his head. As the floors progressed, pancaking down successively, bam, 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 he heard this thundering. And he didn't, of course, and he knew what was happening. He felt the building shaking. He was an engineer. He had this sort of clear-headed technical ability and remained quite calm. He also instinctively ducked, as one would duck with a boulder coming toward one's head. And that's what it felt like to him. He went into a curl in a corner of the stairwell, and then it all fell apart around him, and he felt himself falling free. He kept his eyes closed, but he had all kinds of coherent thoughts, including that this reminded him of a ride in an amusement park, I think Great Adventure in New Jersey, and how that falling free sensation was just like some big roller coaster. He had those thoughts. He felt the debris against his face as he was falling. And he saw, with his eyes closed, he saw these bright flashes. He was being hit by pieces of debris. He was getting bright flashes behind his closed eyes. Then there was a big final white flash, bright flash. And when he woke up, he was on top of the pile, on top of a huge slab. He, as far as he was concerned, hit the ground and woke up. The only thing is it was 2 hours later. So he was out for about 2 hours. He had no memory or no concept of being out, but he knew exactly what had happened to him. I mean, the amazing thing about Buzzelli's story is that he was coherent about it. He could describe it in detail, what it was to fall during that collapse. Beyond that, the amazing thing is that he survived by landing on top of the debris pile. So it was a peculiar thing in that collapse is that the entire building beat him to the ground. It beat him to the ground in two ways. Because of the peculiar pancaking nature of that collapse, top to bottom, systematically. By the time it caught up with him, the collapse, most of the building had, in a sense, already collapsed and was already at something close to its terminal velocity, maybe not its theoretical terminal velocity, but as fast as it was going to get, and passed him. Basically, the building passed him on the way to the ground. And so, he lost the race and survived. In fact, he had very little physical damage. I believe he broke his foot, but he was stranded. Of course, he was disoriented. He couldn't move. He was up high on a slab. And then there was a long story full of fear and certainty of death as fires approached. He looked up, though, and he saw that he couldn't understand what had happened before that even. He knew that the building had collapsed, but he still couldn't understand. Where was the South Tower, which by that time had already gone? Where was the North Tower? He saw sky and smoke, and so there was a funny contradiction in that he was analytical and knew what had happened and knew what was happening when it was happening to him, yet he couldn't get the consequences. It's just what we were talking about, that this death was too severe for him to fathom. So he's lying on this altar. He's having that confusion. There's no one around. It's utterly silent. There are no people around, nothing. It's a wasteland, desert in the middle of New York City. The buildings are gone. There's smoke, and then there's fire. At some point, he was quite certain, to make a long story short, that he was going to die from fire, so certain that he found a piece of jagged metal and was going to cut his wrists in order not at least to burn to death, and had gotten to that point when he was rescued.